Hello and welcome to a presentation of one of the judges from this year's judge panel. Let me transition to the studio. Please welcome Brian. Brian joins us from Seoul, Korea.
Thank you, Sergey. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be in Seoul.
Is it Seoul or is it Seoul? It's Seoul.
It's Seoul.
Seoul. Okay. And before we start, I have a question about Korea. Why lemons are expensive in Korea?
Because we don't grow them here, we have to import them. So lemons are expensive, and limes are even more expensive because less people use limes in their food, and so there are smaller batches that come in. More people use lemons, especially in bars, but still, it's a relatively small batch.
Okay, I was just watching this Korean cooking show, and he was like, well, if you're in Italy, you'll just chop those lemons and use them. But here in Korea, we have to do, it carefully. And then I just realized, okay, well, that's something I didn't know about Korea. But in general, being a lawyer in Korea, how much of your business is Korea-focused and how much it's international? If it's international, then what is connected to? For example, in Poland, being a lawyer would mean working with some German partners, working with American partners, probably in the East as well, but kind of like this ways. So for Korean lawyer, what does it mean?
Well, me personally, 100% of my work is international oriented. And for our firm in general, I would say about 70 to 80% is still international oriented. Kim Chang was founded by Mr. Kim and Mr. Chang on the principle that they wanted to serve foreign companies doing business in Korea. So we're talking early 70s, where Korea was still barely a developing nation, and there weren't too many foreign investments coming into Korea. And both Mr. Kim and Mr. Chang thought that was going to be the next blue ocean. So they adopted kind of a US style law firm business model and decided to serve companies like Coca-Cola's and Pepsi-Cola's, those foreign companies who were starting to come into Korea. And we just grew that client base for the next 40 years. And here we are. So the vast majority of our client base is still foreign companies doing business in Korea. Although in the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, the Korean companies do come to us because of our reputation and our ability, especially in situations where they have to bet the company. And so there was a stretch about 3-4 years where most of my work was representing a Korean company doing a whole bunch of outbound M&A transactions. So I was barely in Korea. I was traveling all over the world, advising a Korean client. But still, I think overall, I say 90 to 100% of my work is international based.
And how big is the firm right now? So in the absolute number, and then for the specific market. So for example, if we're, I don't know, if we're talking about Lithuania, a big firm would be 50 lawyers. Like, wow. If you're, I don't know, 200 lawyers, then probably you're number one. So for Korea, how big is Kim Chang, and how big in general that makes your firm in Korea?
Well, so many people are joining the firm, and a few of them are leaving the firm every day. So the story is not even Mr. Kim, Dr. Kim, who's still active today, knows how many people work for our firm. But roughly, we have about 2,500 fee earners. And we are the largest firm in Korea. And we used to be the largest firm in Asia until the Chinese law firms grew so large.
Mm-hmm. And is it the case that the successful Korean law firm will try to open a branch in, let's say, Tokyo and in Singapore or somewhere else? Or sometimes in Europe, you see there is a German firm, let's say Taylor Wessing. So Taylor Wessing, then there's Taylor Wessing UK, then there's Taylor Wessing Poland, Taylor Wessing Brussels. So kind of like, converting the success into regional offices. And does it happen for you guys in Korea, or you have partners?
There are 2 or 3 law firms that have expanded quite a bit in Asia. And we also do have an office in Hong Kong, office in Hanoi, actually Ho Chi Minh City. And now this year we're opening an office in Singapore. But all of those are really a liaison office. Consists of like one or two lawyers on the site. And our business model is we're not really going to, let's say, Singapore or Ho Chi Minh City to compete with the local law firms. We're there as a liaison from the Vietnamese clients or the Singaporean clients actually doing business in Korea, or for the other Korean companies doing business in those countries. Substantive work-wise, we will work with the other local law firms.
Mm-hmm. And on the subject of Korea, I would say my generation has an image. I mean, okay, my generation, my social class has an image of Korea as being this crazy rich Asian country, music, but like crazy rich is probably in the top 5 associations that I have, because you read across something and it's like, okay, I order tea. There's Chinese tea, Japanese tea. Here's Korean tea, double the price. Okay, so I get it that things are probably high quality and high price in Korea. But when you said, for example, that direct investment wasn't really that big and so on, it's not something I know. I mean, in the 70s, in the 60s, when Korea became a rich country?
Right around 1988. That really was a turning point, because that was when we had the Summer Olympic Games in Korea. So, until 1987, Korea was actually under the military dictatorship. In the middle of the 80s, we had a military dictatorship in Korea. That's kind of amazing if you look back now in 2021. But, I was born in 1971. And when I was born, we had the President Park, who was the president of Korea for 30 years as a military dictator. But he built the basis of the Korean economy. He laid down the foundation, and he built the basic infrastructure industries. But we were still closed off from the rest of the world. But around the time when we were hosting the 88 Summer Games, we had to open up. So we relaxed a lot of the other regulations in the foreign investments, and invited all these American and European companies to come, establish a subsidiary, do the business in Korea, compete. And then another triggering point was the 1997-98 Asian financial crisis. As you may recall, there was the currency crisis that really started out with the Indonesian rupees. That actually spilled over to Korea, and we were bailed out by the IMF in 98. Part of that condition was that we had to go into an austerity program, but also liberalize all of these bizarre regulations that were in place. Part of that meant there were many companies and asset managers and private equity funds who were coming into Korea, purchasing Korean companies and Korean assets. And so we had this rapid influx of foreign capital and foreign M&A skills, and many Korean companies that used to be the pillars of the Korean economy suddenly being owned by foreign companies. For example, you may know a Korean car brand called Daewoo. During the crisis, Daewoo went bankrupt, and it's now owned by GM. And so our culture really changed in the late 90s. So those, I think, were the two turning points in the Korean economic history.
And would you say, so sometimes we talk, okay, let's go back to the legal challenge. We have quite a big influx of teams from Eastern Europe. And at different years, there was an Ukrainian team that won, or I think there were some Belarusians who graduated from London who won. So there was Polish teams always coming up strong. And when we recently discussed it, we said, like, why the German teams are not so competing equally hard. And one of the options is that, while the law students in Germany, they don't really have that pressure. They have their steps lined up. So you graduate, you go to some law firm, maybe you will become a judge, maybe you won't do, but there's no pressure to perform, there's no rush. Would you say that the modern generation of Korean law students is more relaxed because the country is doing so well and they, they take their time, or they actually still retain this competitive spirit of the country that just happens, just build itself up and keeps going?
It's still competitive. In Korea, it's still competitive because in the past, the real threshold was to get into the legal community, which is back a long time ago. We had the bar exam first, and then you go into this place called the Judicial Training Institute, where you actually then learn and train as a member of legal community, either judges, prosecutors, or lawyers, for 3 years. And then you graduate and you become judges, prosecutors, and lawyers. And the bar exam, we had an artificial cap on how many people can pass. Back when Dr. Kim was getting his bar exam, there was like 50 people a year. Now that system went away, but just before it went away, it still only passed 1,000 people every year. Now, we now have a U.S. system, law school system. So you go to the law school first, you graduate, you take the bar exam, and then you can become, I think, judges, prosecutors, or lawyers. But we are now at a stage where there are now too many lawyers. Korea is a relatively small market, and there are just so many lawsuits or positions in the judiciary or the prosecutor's office, or even within the law firms. And the law school and the bar exam system is turning out more lawyers than the society can handle. And so there's now a pressure to do well in the law schools and in the bar exam so that they would have a better chance to get that precious position as a judge or the prosecutor's office or as a lawyer in a law firm.
And then your law system, is it based on something? Or, I mean, if you look at Turkey just took the Swiss law and adapted it a little bit, but it's still essentially a Swiss law in Turkish language. So Korean law, where does it come from? Is it original? Is it similar to something?
Yeah, it comes from Prussia by way of Japan. I don't know, that's true. Because what happened was, of course, we had our traditional legal system back in the dynastic era. But in 1910, Japan took over Korea, and they planted the Japanese legal system onto Korea. And the Japanese legal system actually came from the old Prussian code. So we actually trace our commercial code and civil code to German law. And in fact, many of our legal concepts that we use in Korea is a translation of German legal terms, which sometimes do not have English translations. It's very hard for me as an English speaker to distinguish between two different types of administrative penalties to an American, whereas I can simply use like a German word to describe them to my German clients.
Well, that's unexpected, at least for me. That's very, very interesting to hear. And for the games industry, how big is the games industry? Is there any estimate? So let's say Poland, 40 million population. A year ago, they reported 10,000 people employed in the games industry, and the companies all reported shortage of people to hire. There's simply no one, like if you want to open a new studio in Poland, it's considered to be a red ocean. And in fact, friends of mine were looking to open a studio in Warsaw, and they're a big international company, well-funded. And after 3 months of research, they said, no way, let's do a different country. Because they saw that on the market, there's really, like, you graduate, if you're good, you've got 5 job offers, that's it. So they didn't want to be the company number 7 that was hunting for the same people, so literally rearranging the same talent within different companies rather than benefiting from the stream of the new talent coming in. So for Korea, what is the position of the games industry?
Well, it's huge. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. I'll probably have to look up the game white paper that's published by the government every year. But it's in the billions of dollars. Our industry is dominated by the top three, the three N's: Nexon, NCSoft, and Netmarble, with Krafton rising rapidly. But of course, as everybody knows, Blizzard and Riot Games are very strong players in Korea. And, throughout the 90s, the aughts, 2010s, and now, like last year when, we didn't have a lockdown, but more people spent time at home playing computer games. The game industry, as an industry, from the industry perspective, is still growing. From the players, users' perspective, they're still growing. They're spending massive amount of money on things like loot boxes, which is actually the hottest issue right now in Korea, as you may have read in the newspapers.
But so, and in terms of the legal talent, do you have any law schools that would have a course dedicated to the games industry law, or is there any workshops? I know that Rafael set up this Games Academy in Warsaw, where he's trying to bring the law students into contact with games industry, to trying to filter out the people who are really passionate about it. Hamburg has a course on games industry where Tobias and Jan Peter contribute from time to time. So there is bits and pieces of recognition. Queen Mary has the whole games LLM thanks to Dimita. So how is it in Korea? Can you get specialization in games industry as a lawyer?
Unfortunately, we don't have any law school classes or programs that are dedicated to computer games. I think it's still pretty much a blue ocean here, and people are not just familiar with the other legal aspects of the game industry. Well, they might think of any law that relates to the game industry as well, primarily copyright law, but there are contracts, the publishing contract, to HR issues, to Korean competition law. A lot of different laws are involved in, but people are just not aware. There is not that much of an awareness among the professors, the law students, even among us lawyers too, as to the special nature of the game industry. So we don't have that, but because the industry is growing so rapidly and the game companies are hiring more and more in-house counsels, I think people are thinking, well, there's something unique about that industry, and I want to go there and be the pioneer in the blue ocean. So I think more people are trying to get into the game industry, but as I think it was 2 years ago when I was a judge for the summit. I tried to get the Korean law students participate in this moot court, but that wasn't too successful for a couple of reasons. One was the schedule didn't work out. We have a different class schedule than the Europeans and Americans, so when we would have the summit, that was during the Korean exam time, so they just couldn't participate. And secondly, people think games, I need to study. What do you mean games? I'm not, I'm a law student. I'm the elite of the elite. I'm supposed to be studying. I'm not playing StarCraft or League of Legends.
Okay. I mean, we had similar issues with different countries. It's unexpected, so you will think that you'll get a bunch of Finnish teams, or maybe some Estonians or Lithuanians, but every year we go and make our case in the Lithuanian law schools, and normally people are like, oh no, that's too complicated. It's like, come on, you can do it. But no, I mean, we'll see. Things change for sure. So when you mentioned in-house counsels, I understand that in your position you work with a lot of in-house counsels from international companies. What do you think is the skill or the characteristic of some of the best of the in-house counsels that you worked with? We're trying to define what makes a successful in-house counsel for a games company. Is it understanding of key markets? So for example, you have an understanding of American legal system and Chinese, boom, covered. Is it understanding of business? that a counsel who understands how games are produced and are licensed and revenue is collected, they get better idea of how to use. Is it communication? Is it something else? Like in your experience, what are the characteristics of the in-house counsels that are a pleasure to work with for you professionally?
Two things. I think first of all, love of the product, love of the business. And I think game is in a unique position because it's something that people have enjoyed since they were a little child. It's not like being an in-house counsel in, let's say, a shipping industry. Yeah, they're like container ships. Maybe you love container ships, but it's different from growing up playing the Ultima series or Bard's Tale or Wizardry. And if you really love that product, you're incentivized to study the business, why it works the way it does, and not some different way. But at the same time, you then understand the external factors, the regulatory system. The business wants to grow in one direction, but there are regulations that try to move that to some other direction. Why is there that kind of pressure? Why doesn't the free market economy just let business do whatever they want to? And again, that's a bit of a unique situation for games, at least in Korea. I have talked a number of times during the summit about the unique Korean game regulatory environment, especially the huge dichotomy between the people who want to grow games as pillars of one of our industrial growth versus viewing games as one of these addictive products like cigarettes and alcohol. And you just need to be able to not take one side or the other side too seriously, but be able to balance that. And I think the starting point is your understanding of the business, your understanding of the technology. Mm-hmm. And corollary to that is my second point, which is it's best, as an external counsel's perspective, it's best to work with in-house counsels who are flexible. Yes, I understand that you as a global company have certain internal policies that must be applied across the world. But it is also true in international settings, different countries will have different regulations. There are the extent to which you can push the envelope, but at some point you do need to give in. And we can get there in a more amicable, friendly manner, or we can get there fighting and screaming. And let's compare the cost of how we're going to get to the breaking point. Or do we even need to get to the breaking point? Maybe there is something that we can work with the regulators. And that's a huge challenge for us because we do want to advocate our client's position to the regulators. But at the same time, I would also like our clients understand why there is a particular piece of legislation or regulation in place.
In my experience, I totally subscribe for what you say, but also it's a lot of that depended on whether or not the in-house counsel understands the business and has credibility with the development team to go back to them and say, hey, this is what it is like in Korea, and let's find a way of changing the game, as opposed to being an in-house counsel who doesn't talk to the development team or who doesn't have a credibility of the development team, doesn't have the relationship. And so they just get this, this is what's in the game, go solve it. And then they go and try to solve it, as opposed to, well, this is what's in the game, but if you have some feedback, can you explain to us what we cannot do in Korea so we can find a way of achieving the same goal in a different way? And then you have to work with in-house counsel, the locally based counsel, and someone from the development side who wants to, do something. Sometimes developers just want to do crazy things, and then they say, why not? And it depends, of course, on the culture and different companies, but some developers are so important that, okay, they don't even talk to lawyers. They just say, "This is my vision. Go do it." And then if you don't do it, then it's your problem, not the the celebrity problem. What is the what are you looking at in the teams competing in the legal challenge? So they will be watching this, trying to understand you. So first, from the process perspective, should they focus on the questions that you ask? Should they try to, I don't know, get you to nod and smile, and that's a good sign, or maybe not, I don't know. And from the substance perspective, like, what do you think characterizes the team that deserves the victory?
I think it's very similar to when I train associates at our law firm. First year, straight after law school, they are given their first assignments, whether it's a research paper or marking up some contracts or drafting some memos. Now, I know that it's not going to meet my expectations. It's not like I'm assigning the same work to, 10th year partner or even 5th year associate. And so there will be, shortfalls, but what I'm looking for is, number one, are they sticking at least to the basics? It's very simple. Number one, stick to the basics. If I see a piece of paper with bizarre tab indentations and really bad typos all over the place, and that's going to the trash can. Another thing that I look for is, when I talk about the basics, are you sticking to what's in front of you, the language of the law, the language of the court case, the language of the contract that you're looking at? Or are you just introducing some random thoughts or some random legal principles because you think that helps our case? I think as a lawyer, and it's true across many jurisdictions, the starting point is the plain language of the law and the contracts. And are you really looking at what it says and interpreting the language in a way that a reasonable people would do? If you do those two things, you actually do have a passing grade, in my opinion. Now, the rest of them is me just asking questions to challenge you, to see how far you're willing to take your logic. And because that's the way I was trained. I went to law school in the United States, Socratic method. And so, I'd have a law professor keep asking me same questions in a different way, trying to get me to break at some point. I give up, saying, okay, professor, you're right. But I'm not going to go that far with our participants. But I like to see how well you would stand up under pressure. Because number three, when you are at least a law firm lawyer, there will be a lot of pressure coming from your internal clients as well as your clients outside, who are going to put a lot of pressure to either submit some paper or turn around the contract within a certain deadline, as well as try to reach a conclusion that they want to reach. And I like to see whether you can stand up to the pressure.
Well, I think that makes total sense. I hope the teams will make good use of this and withstand the pressure. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, how do you think digital hearing changes from the traditional hearing? In the traditional hearing, I kind of understand, we walk around, we drink some coffee, we say good morning, we sit down, we chat a little bit, then okay, we begin, boom. You read a lot of body language, you see people moving hands, feet, looking sideways. When you present, you stand up, you're able to, articulate your points. In the digital world, you see less of the judges, so there's much a harder guess to see what exactly they mean. There's too many things happening at the same time. You cannot turn to your friend and say, hey, what do you think? So you have to communicate somehow differently. You cannot stand, you cannot do, how does it change, do you think? Is there any change that the teams should be aware of?
Yes, I think the biggest change is that all of the attention is focused on the speaker. Even now, let's say, in addition to you, Sergey, if I had 3 different people, but you are speaking, so all of my attention is on you. I'm not looking at the body language or the faces of everybody else who's on the side screens. And so it's a lot more important, I think, for the speaker to present his or her case in an eloquent manner, using the right body language, right expression on their faces. But it's I really want to go back to the physical meetings because I really do want to see, like when Sergey's speaking, what are the people sitting next to Sergey looking like? Are they going like this? Or and it's also much easier communication, even among the judge panels. When I was when I was on the judge panel 2 years ago, I had Karen and I forget who the other person was, but we could like look at each other, maybe pass notes about what we were thinking on the spot. This is a little different situation, so we all have to think for ourselves and not be able to non-verbally communicate with each other, and that's difficult. But again, it helps me pay 100% of my attention to the speaker.
I think we should have Yanis sitting like this, so sends a very hard message to all the competitors, like, you guys are driving me crazy, and then they should try harder and do something. Yeah. Oh, I mean, that sounds great. We'll have the hearings in less than a month now. I think all the teams are strong this year and all are very motivated. Some of them already started as juniors in the games industry. So they have the first-hand experience. And I think given the current situation in the games industry, it doesn't really matter where you are for a global company that is looking for in-house counsel to join. So I think that they all have like this fantastic opportunity to showcase themselves, and also with the help of the questions from the judge panel, because I think that this is the perfect showcase. If you challenge them and they are up to this challenge, great. If you don't challenge them, well, who knows? Maybe that guy or that girl is smart, maybe not really. We never know, because, they were not challenged. And I'm really excited also because this is going to be recorded and available. And so some years in the future, we can look back and see how the teams performed and say, oh, this guy is now, counsel here and counsel there and counsel there. That'll be pretty fun. And then hopefully we're all like in September. I don't know how the vaccination is in Korea. We expect to get the shots probably July, August. Most of the Americans already got vaccinated. I would say, I don't know, 90% of the people I speak to at the summit. The British participants are getting vaccinated like really fast these days. Germans are complaining. So I don't know where Korea stands. So are you guys like in line for summer vaccinations or?
Well, our vaccination program started with the people on the front line, the healthcare workers, as well as the elderly housing, in the people in the elderly housing, and we are actually starting general vaccination for people 75 or older tomorrow or today. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm young enough so that my turn would not come around until after July. So I don't know whether I'll be able to have two shots by your currently scheduled summit date. We'll see.
It's the same thing for us. It's like lots of sliding things. So everything is booked. And when we book, we ask, how are about the other events? And they are like, everything is sliding, everything. Like they have a conference with people from Sweden, but the people from Sweden don't know if they will be allowed to travel, allowed to enter, have vaccinations. The vaccination passports are still being deployed. So unless you're in Israel, I think, UK or US, everything else is pretty much... I spoke to the guys at PGL in Romania. Half the studio is already vaccinated. So some unexpected progress in certain things. My friends in Serbia got vaccinated. So it's really like you have to call and say, and then, you get to know. Well, I really hope to see you in September. If not in September, then at the next opportunity. And in less than a month, I look forward to you challenging the hell out of the teams and let the stronger teams win. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. Thank you, Mindaugas.
And now I have to do the transition to the site. So all of these companies are helping us to bring the summit together, as well as Legal Challenge. Thank you very much to all the sponsors, and see you guys in the next video.